I don't know what you think of when you hear the word barren, and I spell that with an E-N. When I said this to my husband, he thought it was O-N and started running around our kitchen. But when you think of the word barren, when a lot of people think of this word, especially women I know, the first thing that comes to their mind is an inability to have children. And in fact, when I looked up the word in the dictionary, which I will note I did online and not in an actual book, the first definitions I found were not producing or incapable of producing offspring, sterile, a barren woman. Now, as a woman, I can assure you that those words cut to the core, not only because they are harsh, but because for most of the women I know, especially those who've lived through this reality, they induce a sense of utter and complete failure for something over which you have no control. Now, we didn't read it this afternoon, but just before the beginning of our Old Testament lesson, the text notes that Sarai is barren. It's an interesting detail to throw in just before the most important promise of the Old Testament is spoken, but it's one that is not accidental. For the picture that is painted of the world into which this promise is spoken is one of utter and complete barrenness. Sarah cannot have children. Abram is, as our reading describes him in Romans 4, as good as dead. And he and Sarai are now supposed to leave their country, their kinfolk, and Abram's father's house and go to some unknown land. What's more, we just would have read at the beginning of chapter 11 that the stability of the whole earth and its one language has just been confused and scattered and torn apart. We meet Abram and Sarai in a world in transition. The stability of the past is gone and the future is uncertain. Abram and Sarai are instructed, however, in this world not to hold on to what they have, to what they know, to the way they've always done things. But in the midst of this utter and complete barrenness, they're instructed to leave behind their security, their resources, all the ways they've ever lived and known, and to risk everything to go somewhere with a different language and to some place that God will show them. The situation seems fraught with trouble and uncertain. Now, I wonder how many of us feel that way these days. And actually, after this entire day, I suppose in a sense it's a silly thing to say, because it seems in some ways to have been the theme of our day today. The world no longer is what it once was. The stability we've been counting on in so many ways is gone. And it's not just an economic stability or the fact that the economy has gone bad and our personal lives are thrown into a tizzy, but even our congregational budgets are failing, and a great many of our congregations are in decline. It's as if we can't produce any new offspring, little growth, no new members if we're even keeping the ones we do have. In a lot of places I visit around the Synod, the anxiety level of a few shrinking congregational leaders is skyrocketing, while it seems that the actual involvement and work on behalf of Jesus in the community is dwindling. What's more, I know that people are frustrated by the fact that the entire metropolitan Washington area is filled with young adults, often like their own children and grandchildren, who seem to swarm the streets and avoid our pews like the plague. To many, the church feels like it's getting older, smaller, less connected to the changing world around us. The future seems blurry at best, possibly bankrupt, potentially barren. The feeling of desperation looms large as the same question is repeated over and over again. Where do we go from here? It's not a new question, of course. It's one that generations of our ancestors have asked themselves during times of transition and in the midst of barrenness. It's the question that Abram and Sarah had to answer when God called them. Where would they go? Back to safety and to the security of their country and their kin and their house? Back to what they'd always known? Or off to something unknown and different? We'd never know it from reading this text, of course, but I'm guessing that the decision took more than just 4 verses worth of time. After all, the comfort of what is known is always more secure and easier than what's unknown. But somehow, Abram and Sarah seemed to know that to stay in the safety of their comfort zone would be to remain barren, but to leave and risk would be to have hope. Now, they didn't do this completely blind, of course, because God's promise to them, spoken to them in the midst of this barrenness, was great. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This is, of course, no small promise, but it also isn't one with much of a plan or a strategy or a timeline behind it. There appears to have been no salary or benefits negotiations, no accommodations guarantee. There was only this promise, spoken in the midst of barrenness, and enough trust from those who heard it to believe that God would make good on it, even if the fulfillment of it was predicated not on more of the same, but on much, much less. Less security, less safety, less familiarity with what they had always known, less of their comfort zone. It's as if the only way out of the barrenness for them was to depart from the security of what they'd come to know in exchange for an untrodden and uncertain path. There's a young adult I know, and I'd like to tell you about, who's walked this uncertain path herself by experiencing the literal reality of womanly barrenness. She tried to get pregnant for years, went to all kinds of doctors, tried different drugs, more exercise, less exercise, different exercise, whatever it was that the doctors told her to do. And she told me that her trips to the doctor and the monitoring and the medications and the constant attention that she was receiving made her begin to feel secure. She regularly knew what her blood counts were, what her body was and wasn't doing, how healthy she was. And this process became a comfort zone in the midst of what was otherwise a very difficult situation. She said it was good to be receiving so much attention, and it began to feel safe and secure. And yet, nothing was changing. She told me that slowly she started to realize that the more of this she did, the emptier she felt. Until one day, she gave it all up. She quit the nearly daily doctor's visits, the medications, the alternative remedies, the varied exercise regimens, and she just lived. Her husband was not terribly happy with this decision. Her extended family was surprised, and she noted that her church had not been terribly helpful in the whole ordeal, since they were always asking her when she would have children and seemingly planning all of their events around them. But she trusted, she told me, that God would give her what she needed and that this might just not be one of those things. And so she waited, barren. I think this is where we are as a church right now, feeling empty, feeling barren, realizing that what we're doing right now just might not be working. It might not even be God's intention for us for the future. Asking ourselves, where will we go from here? Will we choose to return to the comfort of what we've known and to remain in our barrenness? Or will we step out of those comfort zones into something new? If we choose to step out of them, we'll have to identify first what they are and then be ready to deny them or to change them. And as we heard today, denying and changing some of them will be hard for us. For some of us, those comfort zones may be the comfort of busying ourselves inside of our buildings instead of sharing the gospel outside of our walls. Maybe it's the comfort of all of the committee work that we busy ourselves with instead of engaging our neighbors in conversation about God or fellow members in spirituality and in prayer. Maybe it's the fact that we expect others to come inside and be like us instead of allowing them to change us, or for us to go outside and to be changed by those we meet. I would say that it will definitely mean, probably for all of us, reaching out to those in their 20s and early 30s and engaging them in the gospel in ways that make sense to them, even if they don't make sense to us. Whatever it is, we can be sure that it will be uncomfortable. But we can also be sure that to follow in the footsteps of those who've gone before us will be not to remain in the barrenness of our comfort zones, but will be to step out into risk, in hope, trusting in the promise that is spoken in the midst of barrenness, that has been spoken to us throughout the generations, that we are God's people always. For you and I would not sit here as recipients of the promise and children of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Jacob if Abram and Sarai had remained barren, distrusting God and producing no offspring. You and I wouldn't sit here as heirs to the promise, reckoned as righteous in a faith that we've received as a gift not of our own doing. If those disciples hadn't denied the comfort of their resources and gone out and preached the good news and healed diseases at the urging of one who hadn't even yet died and rose. And I can most assuredly say to you that I would not stand here, and a great many other women would not sit here, if it hadn't been for women like Beth Platts, who'd stepped out of their comfort zones in faith and trusted that God was calling them to something new, something that would be brand new for the church. Not knowing what would meet her along her way, but trusting that God would guide her come what may. We are all the recipients of generations of people who, even in transition and barrenness, have left the safety of what they've known to step out in hope for something new and with faith in the God who has always seen us through. We are the recipients of God's promises passed down through generations of people who thought that they were barren until God bore something new, even if unexpected, in them. We are people of the promise, who, if we just respond to what God is already working in us, will bear that promise again right here in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. And it will be new. And it will be different, and it will probably be painful. But if we let God bear it in us, there's no telling what we will be able to pass on to the generations who come after us to bear this promise. So as we step out of this place today and back into our congregations tomorrow, let us step out in hope, trusting that God will speak promise into our transition and uncertainty and barrenness, and guiding us into new and exciting ways of living the faith. Amen.